She entered the ceremony like a shadow, quietly, alone, in a dress 2 sizes too big and shoes that had seen too many winters. No one greeted her. No one asked who she was. Students whispered. Parents watched. Some laughed. They thought she was lost, or that it was a mistake. And she sat in the last row, her throat tight, listening as each name was read from the stage, until the president himself opened the last envelope and read a name no one expected, her name. When the president opened the last envelope, the room fell silent. No one expected that name. If this story moved you, stay with us. What happens next will stay with you for a long time. The sun was slowly setting as she reached the tall metal gates. Beyond them was the school hall, ablaze with lights, filled with music and the voices of proud families echoing through the hallways. She stopped, clutching the invitation in both hands, as if someone were about to come and tell her it was a mistake. Her name was not on any official list. She was not photographed during rehearsals. No one recognized her face when she entered. Some students thought she was the cleaning lady's daughter. Others whispered that she must have come by mistake. Her dress, borrowed from a neighbor, was loose on one side. Her shoes did not match, and her hair was tied with an old ribbon that kept slipping off. Yet she entered, quietly, unnoticed, and sat in the back row, behind the tall flowers and banners that adorned the hall. Every time someone new entered, she hoped it was someone who knew her, but no one did. No family, no friends, just the sound of her breathing amidst a celebration that seemed unfit for her. She didn't cry, but something inside her was breaking. The kind of pain that doesn't make a sound, but stays forever. And yet she stayed there, hard, because deep down, she knew something was going to happen. She could feel it in the air. The furtive glances, the whispered jokes, the little nudges between students. It wasn't just the dress, it was the way she moved, carefully, as if afraid to take up too much space. She wore no makeup. Her nails were bitten, unpainted. And her shoes, they said more than her silence. Old, cracked, too big for her feet. She'd stuffed newspapers inside so she could walk in them at all. Someone from the second row smiled maliciously and nudged her friend. Should she even be here? The second girl laughed. She looks like she came to clean up after everything. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp, sharper than a slap. She heard them, of course she did, but her face was still. She couldn't afford to react. Not there. Not then. She gripped the invitation tighter, as if it were her shield, the only proof that she truly belonged here. She knew what this moment meant to her. Not to them, to her. Because she wasn't supposed to be in a place like this. She had walked miles just to sit in this chair, at this moment. And despite everything, the laughter, the stares, the humiliation, she straightened her back. Because there was something they didn't know. The auditorium resembled a theater. Red velvet armchairs, golden lamps hanging from the ceiling, a huge stage where the winners would soon stand. But all the way back, where the light barely reached, stood a row of reserved chairs. That's where she sat. No one looked back. She watched her peers walk past with their heads held high, laughing, adjusting their dresses, straightening their ties. They shone. She was like a shadow. Every now and then she tugged at her dress, trying to cover the rip in the hem. No one offered to help. No one smiled at her. But she didn't expect kindness. She had learned to live without it. From her seat, the stage was barely visible. The view was blocked by banners and tall bouquets placed for decoration, but she didn't move. She watched the blurred silhouettes and listened to each name that was called out. She repeated them in a whisper under her breath. Not out of jealousy, but as if it were a silent prayer. Let this moment be enough. Let me not disappear today. Because that chair, that far corner, was all she had. And yet she sat there with dignity, as if her shadow were her armor. They didn't scream. They didn't have to. Whispers, when they're cruel enough, carry farther than screams. Behind her, 2 girls were giggling, their hands covering their mouths. Is that the one in the article? The girl from the poor neighborhood, one asked. The other said, "Looks like a joke no one finished." The boy leaned forward and added, "She probably came to steal leftovers from the buffet." They hadn't meant for it to sink in, but it did, and each word was like a thorn driven under her skin. She didn't move, she didn't turn, but her shoulders stiffened, her breath shortened, her fingers tightened around the invitation as if it were the only thing still holding her. It wasn't the first time she'd heard things like that. School had always been a battlefield. Someone had once thrown her backpack into the trash. Someone else had ripped off her homework. Her name had been mocked in the chat rooms. But today it hurt differently. Because this was supposed to be her moment, a chance to sit in the same room, to be part of something bigger. Instead, she felt even smaller, even more alone. And yet, she carried something they didn't. Silence. A silence full of truth, full of scars no one had seen. And a strange calm, the kind that often comes just before a storm. She saw her from a distance, the Polish teacher, Mrs. Selina, walking down the hallway with a notebook clutched to her chest. She was known for her kindness. She was the only one who had ever given her a book to keep. The girl hoped she would approach, that she would smile, that at least one adult would recognize her. Mrs. Selina noticed her. Their eyes met. For a moment, everything froze. But then the teacher looked away, pretending to check a list on a notepad, and moved toward the decorated chairs at the front. The girl's stomach clenched. Maybe she didn't recognize her, or maybe she did, and felt ashamed. After all, what would that look like? A teacher talking to a poor girl in a borrowed dress? No family, no flowers, no chance of a reward. Maybe silence was just easier, safer. At that moment, the girl understood something cruel about the world. Sometimes even those who once seemed good choose comfort over courage. And during such celebrations, where everyone wants to look perfect, some disappear, not because they are invisible, but because others do not want to see them. She looked down at the crumpled invitation in her lap. It felt heavier now, like proof not of belonging, but of how far she was from being truly noticed. The ceremony began with music and thunderous applause. Bright spotlights swept across the stage. The MC, dressed in a dark suit with a gold pin, stepped to the microphone. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate excellence, courage, victory." The room responded with even louder applause. Phones went up. Camera shutters exploded like fireworks. The first name rang out throughout the room, and the elegantly dressed boy proudly strode onto the stage. His parents stood up. His friends shouted with joy. Flash after flash captured the moment forever. The girl in the back row watched. Her heart beat faster, not with envy, but with something deeper, with regret, with mourning for the version of herself that had never received such applause. Then came the second name, the third, the girl in the shiny heels, the boy whose name was on the donor board. One by one, the honorees, the awardees, their stories, photos, scholarships, all planned, all practiced. She squeezed the invitation again, harder this time. The applause grew with each name. Her name was silent, buried somewhere in the silence between readings. And yet she kept counting. She repeated each name in a whisper, not to judge, not out of jealousy, but to remember. Because sometimes, for someone like her, memory is all she has. The applause after each name was like thunder. Parents stood up, clapping overhead, recording every second on their phones. Some threw roses on the stage. Others cried tears of joy. When one girl received a scholarship, her father ran to the stage and hugged her tightly. The host laughed. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed like the Oscars. And in the back, silence. Her silence. She watched it all motionless. Her face expressionless, her eyes quietly burning. Around her, empty chairs. No mother clapped, no father stood up, no one called her name, no one waved from afar. She looked down, adjusting her dress. Not to look better, but to hide the trembling of her hands. At that moment, she was no longer just a poor girl. She was invisible. Someone sneezed 2 rows in front of her. A student behind her whispered a joke. Laughter rippled through the room like waves of stones thrown into water. But nothing reached her. She wasn't even trying to belong anymore. She just persisted. But even persistence has its limits. And somewhere deep in her chest, where words cannot reach, something was awakening. Not anger, not sadness, something older, heavier, something that has been waiting its whole life to be noticed. It wasn't about the dresses, awards, or photos of perfect smiles. It wasn't even that it wasn't read. The point was that no one saw her. She sat up straight, her back pressed against the cold plastic chair, her spine stiff with the effort. But no one looked at her. People walked past, brushing her arm without noticing. Her presence left no trace in their world, as if she were part of the chair, the wall, or the floor. And that hurt more than poverty, more than hunger, more than jokes whispered in the hallways. She had lived her life in such a way that she had learned to shrink, not to ask, not to expect, not to hope. But today, she had hope. Just a little. That maybe, in a room full of lights and speeches and important names, someone would notice her, not just with their eyes, but for real. Instead, she was a void among colors. Yet in that void, she carried something no one else had. Not wealth, not applause, but something deeper, the strength of those no one sees, the quiet pride of those who rise without witnesses, the soul of someone who knows her worth, even when the world refuses to name her. She didn't know that yet, that her name would soon break the silence. The lights dimmed again. The MC cleared his throat and adjusted his microphone. "And now," he said, "we move on to the final and highest honor of the evening." A buzz went through the room, like an electric current. Phones went off. Everyone sat up straighter. Mothers whispered excitedly. Fathers pulled out cameras. Students in the front rows held their breaths, some in hope, others in carefully practiced posture. And at the very end, she didn't move. She expected nothing. She had already resigned herself to being invisible. She had stopped counting names. She had stopped listening. She had stopped hoping. Her fingers loosened their grip on the invitation. It slid slightly into her lap, bent at the corners like a forgotten letter. And then she heard footsteps, heavy, confident, balanced. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the stage. Not the host, not the teacher. It was the president of the school board, a man known for rarely speaking at such events. In his hands, he held a gold-edged envelope, thicker than all the others. The hall fell silent. The silence did not reach her, because she still believed this moment was for someone else. The president was in no hurry. He opened the envelope slowly, thoughtfully, as if he were about to reveal a secret. The entire room held its breath. Thousands of eyes stared at the golden paper in his hands. He looked up and smiled gently. "There is someone," he said, "whose story has never been told on this stage, who did not ask for recognition, but earned it in silence." The audience stirred. Curiosity, surprise. "This award," he continued, "is for perseverance without applause, for strength without witnesses, and for greatness born in shadow." And then he said her name, clearly, confidently, loud enough to reach the back row. For a moment, no one reacted. The name was foreign, unpracticed. The students at the front turned their heads. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Others checked the program for a name that wasn't there. But in the last row, the girl's heart stopped. She blinked, she froze. Sure, it was just her imagination, until he repeated, "Come on stage," her full name. And the silence shattered like glass. The name may be silent until it is spoken by someone with a voice. As the president repeated her name, a movement passed through the room like a ripple in still water. Heads began to turn, first the front row, then the second, all the way to the back. One by one, people turned over their shoulders, searching. There was no recognition on their faces, only surprise. She sat still, hands clenched in her lap, breathing shallow. For a split second she wished the ground would open up beneath her, not out of shame, but because her body didn't know such attention. It had never learned to. And then she felt it, the weight of hundreds of gazes. Some surprised, others curious. A few even judgmental, but all directed at her. The girl who had been laughing before now watched with her mouth hanging open. The boy who had been making fun of her shoes lowered his gaze without a word. The moment stretched. No one spoke. No one clapped yet. And in that suspended silence, something stirred within her. The girl who had entered, wanting only not to disturb, now had the entire room waiting for her next move. She reached the stage, her heart pounding, her eyes wide open, but dry. The president stepped to the side and gestured for her to come to the podium. But instead of presenting her with a medal, he turned to the audience and began to speak. "Before I present this medal," he said, "you need to hear who she is." The silence thickened again. "This young woman," he continued, "walked 5 kilometers to school every day. She studied without electricity, without internet, often without food. She cared for her sick grandmother, and yet she was one of the top students in the district. But she never bragged about it to anyone." The room moved restlessly. No one took her picture. No one invited her to rehearsals. No one reserved a spot for her today. And yet she came, quietly, alone, with dignity. He turned towards her. "It is because of you that this ceremony has meaning. You are an example of perseverance, not privilege, truth, not performance. And today, the silence that surrounded you ends. Today, everyone must see you." He took the medal in his hands and placed it around her neck. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything, but for the first time in her life, the world heard her, with her eyes. At first there was only silence. And then, somewhere in the middle row, a woman stood up. She began to clap, slowly, thoughtfully. Behind her, others, a teacher, a student, another. And then the sound grew. One round of applause turned into many, first quietly, then harder, deeper, like rain that begins as a whisper on the roof and ends in a storm. This wasn't just applause. This was something else. Not for popularity, not learned. It was an apology, it was admiration, it was regret that they hadn't seen it sooner. Some parents wiped away tears, some teachers looked down in shame. Even students who had ridiculed her before were now clapping, not because someone told them to, but because something inside them had broken, something that needed to be fixed. She stood still, the medal heavy on her chest. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the burden of finally being noticed. The applause continued, unabated. They echoed throughout the room. They shook the walls. They echoed in every corner where silence had previously resided. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. She felt she had to. Long after the applause had died down, the echo of her presence continued. People spoke of her not with pity, but with respect. Teachers who had never noticed her began to ask about her past. Students who had never said her name now whispered it with admiration. Her story spread not because of a medal, but because of what she had shattered, the illusion that worth could be measured by looks, money, or connections. She left the stage in silence, walking down the same aisle. But this time the silence wasn't rejection, it was respect. People stepped back, heads bowed slightly. It wasn't loud, it didn't have to be. She didn't get rich that night. No money fell from the sky. No sponsor knocked on her door, but something bigger happened. She was noticed. And in that moment, every step in torn boots, every page read by candlelight, every tear held in the throat, all of it transformed into something else. Dignity, memory, meaning. Because courage is not loud. And sometimes, the bravest are those who never believed that anyone would remember them. But they are remembered.